Hi everyone, my name is Paul Young. I'm doing a series of presentations around government policy as part of the build-up to the election. As part of trying to get more understanding of key policies and key aspects are being ignored or being deflected by either the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau or the NDP under Thomas Mulcair. So let's talk about resources. Now, Canada is a huge country for resources, and that resources covers a wide range of things, and most of the stuff that you're hearing about talk about is the oil and the oil sands or the oil offshore in Newfoundland. But we're more than that, just that. We're aluminum. We're a huge aluminum company. We're also a huge nickel, copper, iron ore, lithium, vanadium, all the minerals that are required as part of the everyday life. So your cell phones need lithium battery. Your car is typically on aluminum. So all this aspect in terms of raw material and the development has been clearly miscommunicated in terms of the policies that Mulcair or Justin Trudeau will bring in. Let me tell you exactly the role of how minerals extraction and mining happened in Canada. Back in 1982, our Constitution was brought back to Canada, which then, as part of the whole constitutional amendments led by Peter Lougheed, the provinces were able to have more control over the mining and development of mineral resources. So whether that's the oil sands, whether that's nickel deposits, whether that's rare metals, or whether that's aluminum, etc. The provinces have responsibility over that sector. So that allows the provinces to make decisions based on how they're going to extract and mine those metals. Now, this is what's not told to you. In Canada, the resource sector, the mining sector, employs 380,000 workers across Canada directly. Now, that being said, when you hear comments by the NDP that they're looking for basically a sustainable, what's that really mean? Are you going to bring in more regulations and tell provinces what to do? If so, how is that going to impact a $54 billion business of GDP? And if you use GDP of $2 trillion, that's 2.5% of GDP is tied directly to the mining industry. Now, it's nice to say I want green energy, whether that's wind turbines, or whether that's solar panels, whether that's biomass, but all of them have some sort of carbon footprint in them or require minerals like silicon, or rare metals, or boron, or graphite. So if Canada's a leader in that, and you're going to look down at downstream transactions that I'll talk later on, then you also need to support the mining sector. Basically, 20% of exports. Now, you hear the NDP and Liberal government talk about balance of trade. Balance of trade really represents the inflows and outflow of cash. If we've got huge gaps in terms of balance of trade deficits, then if you're not pushing exports or pushing the ability of Canadian companies to get inward investments to develop this for part of exports to keep that profit here, guess what happens? You're going to start having gaps there. That's something the NDP never talks about, how they're going to settle these gaps. Let's talk about investment. Canada is not an island. Canada competes on the world for foreign direct investment. In this particular case, Australia is #1 in the world for mining investment. A lot of that has to stem from their relationships with China. Now, that being said, Canada has a critical role that it needs investment. Our banking system here doesn't have enough capital to help mining operations to get off the ground. So therefore, we require investment from other countries or other banking sectors. And that's never discussed, because that's the inflow that would be coming in as part of the balance of trade. That's the inflow of capital. Economic impact. How many of you own RSPs? How many look at the Canadian pension plan? How many look at your own company pension plan? Well, those pensions are invested in shares of companies for returns. The Canadian Stock Exchanges like the Toronto or Vancouver are heavily driven by the mining sector because Canada has a mining sector here. So if you've got an NDP government, Liberal government, that's going to bring in more regulation, bring in cap and trade, what's that going to do to the mining sector in terms of those stock valuation? It's going to impact them. And yet you never hear that discussion by the NDP. Why? Because it's almost like got a hidden agenda that they don't want to mine. They figure they can turn this economy to a sustainable economy based on their hidden agenda without worrying about where the resources are coming from. Now let's talk about upstream and downstream transactions. You hear a lot of political maneuvering on the NDP and downstream. Downstream means you take the raw material, take it downstream, and you put it to a finished goods. That's where the value added business comes in. For that to come in, you need to be competitive in your manufacturing processes, from hydro rates to labor rates to infrastructures, all that in terms of the overall cost structure. You also have to have people willing to pay a premium for that good and services to be manufactured or sold here in Canada. Now, it's easy to say I want to expand downstream processes, but unless you get a commitment that people are willing to pay higher prices, or you're able to keep control of those costs better at a provincial level, you will never be able to develop downstream production. Let's talk about clean energy. For example, lithium, vanadium, boron, graphite, rare metals. These are all critical metals along with others that are part of the production cycle that produces green energy. Now, these are also some of the most nastiest materials in terms of extraction and the byproducts when you mine them, in terms of getting into the containment. So, yet you hear the Liberal government and the NDP government talk about all these areas that they want to develop green technology. Now, unless you deal with trade investment deals, most of these materials come from a lot of cases from South Africa. They come from China. They also come from internally in terms of how we want to develop them internally. Now, if we talk about exports or imports, if we're bringing in from South Africa, what's that going to do? That's also going to reduce or increase our deficit for trade, because we're going to be bringing more goods into we're going to sell to China. It also allows us other issues too, is we're going to have to pay these people, and that leads to the balance of trade issues. Yet you never hear the NDP talk about how they're going to close that gap down. What they do talk about is constantly this gap between trade deficits as well as the balance of trade. So let's talk about NDP policies. Both the NDP and Liberal focus on mining is destructive. Most cases are no clear policy on mining development other than sustainable. Sustainable is a big word because they like to use that in terms of playing to the green. But what does that mean in terms of government policy? Does that mean more regulations? Stephen Harper already has regulations. He put processes in on the assessments. That's the reason why we have independent assessments done. Tax policies. Harper's going to not plan to increase taxes other than maybe cost of inflation, CPP, He doesn't plan across-the-board tax increases like the NDP and Liberal government are planning to do with either cap and trade, CPP enhancements, or corporate taxes.